Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Protecting Seniors from Scams, Identity Theft, Scams, and Elder Abuse. I'm Kathleen Warshawski, and I'm with Seniors Blue Book. Our speakers today are going to be Joyce Logan and Tavis Schrieffer. Joyce is with Ruby Care Senior Advisors, and Tavis is with Telecom. Just to give you a little bit of background about our speakers, Tavis Schrieffer is the founding CEO of Telecom. As a caregiver for his mother, he realized the magnitude of issues around helping a loved one with dementia retain independence while keeping them safe from targeted scams and telemarketers. Tavis founded Telecom to solve these and other phone-related issues with the mission to help seniors stay safely connected with family and friends while prolonging their independence. So thank you, Tavis, for being here today. And then a little bit about Joyce Logan with Ruby Care Senior Advisors. Joyce has spent most of her life in Texas, but she was originally born and raised in Ohio. She earned her Bachelor of Science degree at The Ohio State University and began her career in social work. She currently is a certified senior living advisor, a certified dementia practitioner, as well as a board member of DFW chapter of the National Placement Referral Alliance. With great compassion and love for people, Joyce never stops serving. She is actively involved in her community, including AWARE, the Alzheimer's Association, Women's Auxiliary to Children's Medical Center, Junior League of Collin County, and also serving as a board member of the Dallas Area Parkinson's Society. Inspired during the time she spent caring for her mother-in-law, Ruby, in 2011, Joyce founded Ruby Care Senior Living Advisors. Through Ruby Care, she enjoys helping seniors and their families navigate the complicated choices they face when deciding their future living plans. Again, welcome, Joyce.
Thank you.
So our next.
Thank you, Kathleen, for the introduction, and I look forward to. Were you finished, Kathleen? I just jumped right in.
Not quite.
Okay, sorry.
That's all right. I want to provide our CE disclosures for today. The purpose of today's program is to increase the knowledge of the professional on common senior scams, identity theft, and elder abuse, to decrease the number of older adults who may be experiencing these forms of elder abuse. The objectives: today, you should be able to describe 2 common senior scams that target older adults, identify 2 risk factors that contribute to increasing the vulnerability of older adults to identity theft, scams, and elder abuse, state 2 ways to protect older adults from senior fraud and scams, and describe how to report elder abuse in Texas. In order to receive the educational component of this, you have to complete the sign-in information, which means registering via Zoom, attend the entire presentation, complete the evaluation tool. The link will be provided at the end, and then you'll receive your 1-hour CE for social work and LPCs. Your certificates will be sent in via email in 4 to 5 weeks. Conflicts of interest: there are no relevant professional, personal, or financial relationships related to the planning or implementation of today's activity. Commercial support: we've not received any financial commercial support. It's been hosted by Seniors Blue Book of Greater Dallas, and the credit is donated by Seniors Blue Book. And now with that, I'm going to have Tavis go ahead and share his screen, and he is going to share a little bit of statistics with us.
All right, thanks, Kathleen. Let me get this going. All right, I assume everyone can see that?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so just a few stats. $28.3 billion. That's older Americans are losing $28.3 billion annually from elder fraud and financial exploitation. These figures come from a new AARP report that was published earlier this month. There's a QR code there if anybody would like to download that report, or you can contact me after. I'd be happy to share it. So, and now it didn't update that. I apologize. So much of the media focuses on the professional scammers, but this only accounts for about 28% of that $28 billion. According to this report, over $20 billion of it is exploited from seniors annually by people that the senior actually knows, or families, relatives, or other people that they actually know. Even more so, there it is, even more so, only 12.5% is actually reported of those. So it could be severely underreported. On contrast, 67%, if it was from a stranger, the senior is 67% more likely to actually report the incident. So in 2022, the Federal Trade Commission received 2.4 million fraud reports totaling $8.8 billion lost. Now, they do not feel that these numbers reflect the actual totals, because they also concluded that seniors are 94% more likely to file a fraud report if they haven't lost money. Those are their words. It's a confusing phrase, but what that really means is that if the senior did lose money, they're much less likely to even file a report versus if they didn't lose money. So out of the reports filed, 43% of them, of these scams, were from phone calls or text messages. 27% were online theft, 11% were email scams, and 3% were mail fraud. Now, these figures are similar to those that are reported in AARP's Fraud Watch Network, just for the Dallas-Fort Worth area this year alone. These are just a few of the high-level stats, and we'll touch on more of them later, along with some ways to help prevent this from happening to your clients. Thanks, Kathleen.
Now,
So
Joyce
I'm
is
at-
going to go ahead and share some information with us as well.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen, for the introduction, and all of you joining us, as we will be discussing ways of protecting older adults from identity theft, scams, and elder abuse. So slide 2, is that where we are?
Yes.
Today, I will be going over definitions and types of thefts and scams and elder abuse. So, and the importance of addressing the issue and call to action. Elder abuse is a serious and often hidden problem in our society. Shockingly, approximately only 1 in 10 Americans age 65 and older have experienced some form of elder abuse, whether it's been physical, emotional, financial, or sexual. And what's even more concerning, our family members are responsible for 90% of the cases. And this issue is not just limited to one setting. It occurs in homes, which that's where most of the thefts happen with family, but assisted living communities, hospitals, any healthcare environment. While this is even more alarming, I think you're ahead of the, you should be on, yes, slide 2, but that's okay. What's even more alarming is that many of the cases go unreported. One study estimates that only 1 in 24 cases of elder abuse are reported to authorities. So that means millions of them are not being reported, and the elderly are suffering from this abuse and not receiving any help at all. So it's very, very important for all of us to bring awareness about the issue, and we need to take some steps to address this abuse. And we encourage reporting so those affected can receive the support they need. So slide 3, I think that's probably where we are now, right?
Yes.
The previous one. While identity theft is a subset of financial elder abuse, we wanted to call that out separately, so everyone is educated and aware of the growing number of scams and attacks on seniors. I know Tavis said that this is a small part of it, but he'll get into it more later. So the definition of identity theft is a fraudulent acquisition and use of someone's identity in order to access resources or obtain credit and other benefits in that person's name. So it occurs when someone takes someone's personal information, like their name, social security number, credit card, without their permission to commit these crimes. Identity theft can happen anytime to anyone, not just to the elderly, and it has so many adverse effects. So there's many different types of identity thefts, but we're going to talk about 4. Financial happens to be the most common one, but there's criminal, synthetic, medical, and those can be just as detrimental as financial. Financial identity theft is the most common, as we all know, hear about the most. And that occurs when someone uses another person's information to obtain the goods and services and information. For instance, an ID theft may use your bank account or credit card numbers to steal money or make purchases, or they may use your social security number to open up other types of credit cards out there. I know our company was a victim of identity theft, and we're not considered elderly yet, and it happened at a health senior fair. So it can happen to anybody, as we said. And victims of financial identity theft lose more than just resources. As we know, that we lose a lot of hours trying to recover the funds, but we also go through a lot of stress of the result of that. So every year, approximately 15 million Americans are victims of ID theft, and the average financial loss is $3,500, and they spend about 25 hours to recover from the ramifications. I know our charges were about $3,000. They went out charging for a computer and bought gift cards. So we knew we weren't doing it. So we were working the health fair, but we got alerts on our phones to let us know. So the next one is criminal. All identity theft is criminal, but this particular type happens when someone is arrested and they provide your own personal information to law enforcement instead of their own. So you really may not even know that this has happened until you get something in the mail, like a speeding ticket that goes unpaid, and you've got a notice that the judge has issued a warrant for your arrest. Synthetic identity theft, that's another one where they are creating fake identities using real people's information. They will use a combination of people's birth dates, addresses, social security numbers, and blending them all together to create another fake profile. And then they use that new persona to apply for loans and credit cards, and they commit other financial crimes. Then you have medical. In the case of medical identity theft, that's where they use your personal information to receive health care in your name. They will use your insurance cards information to go see doctors or get prescriptions and file claims to your insurance provider. Next, slide 4. So scams targeting seniors. One of the main reasons seniors are targeted is because they think they have the most amount of money sitting around in accounts. And they also are unaware of the trends that the scam artists are using. And they are most vulnerable because they may have some cognitive impairment or insecure or some tech deficit. So we're just going to talk about the top 6 scams that affect elderly. And the first one is the government impersonation scams. This is where scammers pretend to be calling you from the government agencies like Social Security Administration or the IRS, or they say they work for Medicare and they scare you. They'll say, like, if you don't pay or for this or refuse to give me your personal identification, something bad may happen. You may not get your next Social Security check or other government benefit. Then you got the sweepstakes lottery scams. And this is where a scammer might call or email or text you and say you want a substantial prize or lottery, and you must pay a processing fee in order for you to receive that. So that's how they try to get your personal information. And then you got identity scams. This is where individuals pretending to be insurance provider representatives, possibly offering a senior a free medical equipment or medication just to lure you into giving your medical ID. And then this is also, you've heard of the grandparent scam where the the grandchild's calling saying I'm in jail or they're stranded out of the country and they need money to get home, but please don't tell anybody else. Don't tell my family. Then we got the robo phishing scams, and seniors are more prone to telemarketing and phishing scams than any other age group. So phishing scams can happen again through email, text messages, phone calls, and they're just looking for seniors to trick them into revealing their personal information. You may get fraudulent emails or text messages, often pretending to be from a company or group that they know or trust, like your bank or church, and they're just trying to steal your information. And then you got the tech support scams. I mean, I get those alerts on my computer sometimes if I hit the wrong button, but this is where they impersonate tech support, convincing seniors that their computer or device has some type of critical issue, and they offer to fix it remotely so they can gain access to your personal information or install some type of malware. Then you got romance scams. As more people are turning to online dating, I think they've been doing that for a while, but con artists are seizing the opportunity. Romance scammers, they create these fake profiles and then they get on social media like Facebook to exploit the older adults' loneliness to get money. In some cases, the scammers may be or pretend to be overseas, and they'll request money to pay for visas, medical emergencies, travel expenses to come visit. I know I have a friend, her mother-in-law is married and lives with her husband who has dementia. She was on Facebook and got befriended with this guy, and he started calling her for months. He courted her and she sent him lots of money before the family was able to stop it. But it's interesting, they've stopped it, but she says she's not giving up that boyfriend. So there's other types of scams, the charity scams, the home repair scams, investment scams, funeral scams, so on. There's so many others. And so now we got to be a little more fearful. We're hearing more and more about the AI voice cloning scams. Slide 5. So ways to protect our seniors from scams is education and awareness, and use safe online practices, trusted contacts, that's easy, limited sharing personal information, monitoring financial activities. And you can go to identityiq.com and they have a list of ways to protect identity, but some of them are simple ones like monitor your financial accounts. That includes your bank accounts, credit cards, retirement accounts, Social Security, and reading those statements and check balances and review the transactions. And it's always important to keep that Social Security number protected. So criminals that have your Social Security card means they can create all kinds of new lines of credit and loans. And having your driver's license in conjunction with your Social Security card gives these even more opportunity. And so it's good to use strong passwords, unique passwords for every account. I know some of these things sound so basic, but we need to be reminded. So you can keep track of passwords. You can sign up for a password manager app. And then watch out for impersonator scams. And the one big one that stood out to me is file your tax returns early. So the longer taxpayers wait to file their returns, the more time criminals have to file that fraudulent tax return in your name. And then, protect those documents. You may want to put them in a safe place at home, but may put them in a safety deposit box. And then shred old documents that you're not using. And the big one too is monitor your credit reports. Signs of identity theft can show up on credit reports in forms of new accounts. And so you can see a lot that's happening there that you may not have been aware of. So next slide, slide 6. So this next section is we're going to be talking about different forms of elder abuse and their definitions. And I know you all can read, but I'm going to read them to you. The definition of elder abuse: physical, sexual, psychological, also known as emotional abuse, as well as neglect, abandonment, financial exploitation, an older person by another person or entity that occurs in any setting, home, community, or facility, either in a relationship where there is an expectation of trust or when an older person is targeted based on age and disability. Next slide. So elder abuse is exerted in a lot of ways, but we're going to talk about 6, all which affect the victim's state of mind, their well-being, and their dignity. So the types of elder abuse we're going to talk about are the financial, emotional, psychological, financial, which we've talked about a lot already, sexual neglect, and self-neglect. Next slide. Definition of physical abuse. The use of physical force that may result in bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. Physical abuse may include, but is not limited to, such acts as violence, as striking with or without an object, hitting, beating, pushing, shoving, shaking, slapping, kicking, pinching, and burning. And some of the signs and symptoms are bruises in specific patterns or shapes, like a handprint or a belt buckle, broken bones, broken personal care items like eyeglasses or dentures, bruises, cut black eyes, open wounds. And people using, some examples are using of physical restraints, inappropriate use of drugs, force feeding, physical punishment of any kind. I'm going to give you a physical abuse case study by a long-term care aide. Monica was 79, was placed in a long-term care facility where, when her ALS became severe and her family could no longer care for her, her family became concerned when she saw bruising on the arms and back. Monica was not able to speak and could not tell her family how she got the bruises. Monica's family asked the staff about the bruising, but was not satisfied with the explanation. The family had noticed that when a certain aide helped bathe her, Monica became upset and agitated. They suspected the aide was hitting Monica, and they called local law enforcement. Next slide. Definition of emotional and psychological abuse. The infliction of anguish, pain, distress through verbal and nonverbal acts. Emotional and psychological abuse includes, but is not limited to, verbal assaults, insults, threats, intimidation, humiliation, and harassment. And it is definitely most difficult to detect signs of symptoms of emotional abuse than any other type of abuse. So some of the signs and symptoms are changes in the victim's behavior, emotional responses, tearfulness, agitation, withdrawn behavior, reluctance to communicate, and depression. A case study by psychological case study by abuse by a daughter. Jane had not seen her friend Harry, 87, at Mass for weeks. This was not like her friend since Harry went to Mass almost every Sunday. Jane stopped by Harry's house. Harry answered the door, and Jane was shocked. Her friend had lost weight, looked terrible, and had obviously been crying. Harry told Jane in a hushed voice that his daughter had moved in and would not let him go to church or the senior center or even out of the house. Harry said his daughter was now controlling everything, including his money. Before Jane could say anything, Harry's daughter started yelling, and Harry quickly shut the door. Jane decided to make an anonymous report to Adult Protective Services. Next slide. Excuse me. A definition of financial abuse. I know we talked again about this quite a bit, but this definition is the illegal and improper use of the elder's funds, property, or assets. And financial exploitation has become one of the largest and the one that's most common. And again, we talked about the seniors are probably most targeted because they feel that they have the most money saved than any other age group. So some signs and symptoms are unexplained money withdrawals, or change in banking practices, changes in legal documents, or change in wills or guardianship, missing money or possessions, and purchases of unneeded items or services. So a financial abuse case study, Joseph and Malvina, both 80, retired, had taken in their daughter after her release from prison. Soon after she moved in, the couple received one credit card bill for over $8,300, another one for over $12,000, and a third one for like $10,000. And the couple had no idea their daughter had used their credit cards, and it had opened additional credit cards in the mother's name. Now Joseph and Malvina were faced with significant debt. The couple's other adult child contacted Adult Protective Services, credit card company, and the Federal Trade Commission. Next slide. That guy kind of looks interesting or creepy, doesn't he? A definition of sexual elder abuse: the non-consensual sexual contact of any kind with an elderly or dependent adult. Sexual contact with any person incapable of giving consent is also considered sexual abuse. Some of the warning signs include bruising around the breast or genitals, unexplained anal or vaginal bleeding, venereal disease, genital infections, and bloody clothing on the bedding, and a sexual abuse case by a nursing aide. Margaret, 77, lived in a nursing home that was known for good residential care. One day, a nursing aide noticed that Margaret appeared anxious, but Margaret would not explain why. While preparing for her bath, a nursing aide saw multiple bruises on Margaret's arm and neck and back and asked what happened. Initially, Margaret did not say anything. Subsequently, the director of nursing learned that the other resident, that a new aide had sexually assaulted Margaret. As required by the law, the director of nursing reported the sexual abuse to Adult Protective Services, and APS initiated an investigation involving the ombudsman and local law enforcement. So sexual abuse among the elderly is a growing concern that occurs both in the home and the hospital settings. So as you are healthcare professionals, you can play a crucial role in preventing and addressing this. So, and you have to be careful too. Inappropriate jokes, patient flirting, or any other forms of misconduct by healthcare professionals can be considered sexual abuse. So it's important to understand and what constitutes sexual abuse and take appropriate measures to prevent it from happening. Next slide. Neglect. The refusal or failure to provide goods or services, including medical services that are necessary to avoid physical and emotional harm, pain, or mental illness. And some of the signs and symptoms are dehydration, malnutrition, weight loss, untreated pain, falls, medical conditions, lab findings, inappropriate medicine uses, changes in the elder or caregiver behavior. And we have a list here of examples or refusal of failure to of those responsible to provide the following necessities. And they're listed here as food, water, clothing, so on. A case study of neglect by a son and daughter-in-law. Tamara, 76, lived alone, but had trouble getting around. Her son and wife asked Tamara to move in with them. Tamara had her own bedroom on the second floor, and she stayed there most of the time. She could not use the stairs easily. Her son and daughter-in-law both traveled frequently for work and sometimes neglected to give her adequate water, food and water. They failed to groom her and clean her room too. So one day, Tamara became dizzy, weak, and disoriented. So the daughter-in-law took her to the hospital. The hospital staff discovered that she was dehydrated, disheveled, and obviously unwashed. So they asked her about her care, and Tamara said she was well cared for. Nevertheless, as required by law, the hospital staff reported suspected neglect to the Adult Protective Services. Next slide. Self-neglect, and this is the final one, is a refusal or being unable to care for your own one's own health and safety. The definition of self-neglect excludes situations in which mentally competent older individuals who comprehend the consequences of their choices willfully, deliberately select to take part in acts that will put their health and safety at risk. So some of the signs are very similar to neglect, the poor personal hygiene, weight loss, dehydration, malnutrition, This is where unpaid bills, unclean or unsafe home, or hoarding. A case study of self-neglect. Lester is 76 years old and lives in a dilapidated cabin along the river, about 5 miles from town, and he's a chronic alcoholic, spending the majority of his monthly income on alcohol instead of groceries. Lester has type 2 diabetes, and he can no longer remember to take his insulin on time. Lester's water and electricity were cut off last week, so because he had not paid his bill for several months. So now he uses the river for cleansing and eats whatever he can find in his kitchen, old canned food, and etc. And due to his poorly controlled diabetes, he's now developed ulcers on his feet, and they become infected. When visiting from out of town, Lester's adult son, Charlie, discovered his father's poor living conditions and deteriorating personal hygiene and ill health. He also notices his father's become more confused, and Charlie tells his dad that he's worried about him and his health and safety, but Lester angrily insists that he is free to live his life the way he wants. When Charlie leaves his father's cabin, he immediately contacts the local sheriff department and asks for assistance to make a welfare check to evaluate his father's condition. Law enforcement visits Lester's home, suspecting self-neglect. They report the case to the State Adult Protective Services, which investigates further and assists Lester to address his physical and mental health, hygiene, and safety issues. So when an elderly neglects their personal well-being, clinicians sometimes are very limited in what they can do. Home care teams cannot enter a patient's home unless they're invited, and the same is true for adult protective services. And by law, a clinician must report any abuse to APS, but unlike child protective services, sometimes they have little enforcement power. Next slide. So some of the risk and factors contributing, and I'm not going to get into the details of them, but are social isolation, physical limitation, mental health, cognitive impairment, and social economic factors. Next slide. A few causes and contributing factors that contribute to elder abuse is caregiver stress. Caring for a elderly person, you know, we all know it can be demanding and overwhelming, and it leads to a lot of frustration and anger, which can result to that abusive behavior. And then caregiver burnout can have a significant impact on the quality of care provided to the elderly patient, not only in a home environment, but also in a professional healthcare setting. Unfortunately, staff burnout is one of the primary causes of abuse and neglect in healthcare facilities. So it's crucial for us professionals in the healthcare industry to be aware of the effects and the stress that's having on our fellow coworkers, and try to intervene when possible and maybe report it. But it's important for the staff to treat each patient with respect and dignity, you know, regardless of their situation or behavior. And by taking some of these steps of caregiver stress and burnout, we can improve the quality of care that we need to provide to our seniors, elderly patients. And another one is lack of knowledge about proper care. Caregivers may not receive professional training, and that happens a lot. And so they need to know how to deal with certain situations. And if they aren't trained, that leads to a lot of neglect and mistreatment. And substance abuse is another factor. Use of drugs and alcohol by a caregiver can impair their judgment and increase the likelihood of abusive behavior. And that goes for the elderly, you know, they use substance abuse too, and that can affect it all. And lastly, safe discharge from care facility can also be a contributing factor. Without proper planning and support, elders may be discharged from facilities prematurely without adequate resources, and that increases their risk for neglect. Next slide. So Texas is a mandatory state of reporting. So the law requires healthcare professionals to report suspected abuse and neglect on the elderly patients. So this means that if an elderly person claims that they are being abused and neglected, healthcare professionals must not ignore those allegations and take immediate action to investigate it. And just a real cautious rule of thumb is like, when in doubt, report it. So failure to do so can result in legal consequences for the healthcare professional and can put the safety of the elders at risk. So, Texas's statutes mandates that anyone, not just healthcare professionals, to report if they suspect elder abuse, they report it to the Texas Abuse Hotline. And some here are listed. Mandated reporters may include, but not limited to this list here, healthcare professionals, care custodians, employees of adult protective services agencies, employees of financial institutions, law enforcement, and clergy. Next slide. So this is a list of ways people to contact and list of resources to help elders and help with the reporting. If an elderly person is living outside of a nursing home or assisted living, we should call Adult Protective Services. And a lot of us already know what APS is, but they are the state agency that investigates reports of abuse and neglect for adults who are elderly or have disabilities. And however, if an adult elder is residing in assisted living or a nursing home, the Health and Human Services should be contacted. HHS is responsible for regulating long-term care facilities and investigating allegations of abuse and neglect. A long-term care ombudsman listens and addresses these concerns in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, and they act as an advocate for the residents. And then you got APS, and not only do they investigate abuse, but they can offer financial assistance for rent, utility, restoration, social services, health services, legal action. Excuse me. And referrals to other state and community resources. Last week, I just got a call from APS, and I was helping them with a case of a senior of self-neglect. And then the National Center of Elder Abuse provides the latest information regarding research, training, best practices, news, and resources on elder abuse. And then others are listed here too. Area Agency on Aging, the Attorney General's Office, Meals on Wheels provides us meals and support. And next slide. So here are some of the resources that we already talked about or I listed, and their website addresses. And if you don't get these, you can call me and I can get those for you. And then next slide. Thank you all. That's it.
Thank you, Joyce. We appreciate that presentation. I just want to let you all know that I do have a slide to share at the end that will have the contact phone numbers for the top 3 agencies. And it's based on location of the senior. So if they're in a nursing home, assisted living, or they're receiving home health or hospice, you report to the Texas Health and Human Services. If they are residing in a long-term care facility, you contact the Attorney General's office, or if they're receiving Medicaid funding, you also contact the Attorney General's office. And then if their abuse is happening in the home setting and they don't have any home care or agency going in, then that's when you report them to Adult Protective Services. And the reporting the places where you report, that changed just in the last 6 to 8 months. So this is kind of new information, and we want to make sure that it's clear to you all. So we do have a slide that we'll share at the very end that explains it and gives you the phone number to contact them. And now we will have Tavis give an additional presentation. Tavis, are you ready to share?
Sure. Yeah, I can do that. Thanks, Kathleen. All right, you should see it now. Is that right?
Yes.
So, yeah, so as Kathleen mentioned, I'm Tavis Schrieffer with Telecom. So for the next few minutes, I'd like to share some tips that can help keep seniors safe from a lot of the scams that Joyce had described, as well as stopping other unwanted calls, like from family members or others that are trying to take advantage of seniors. So at Telecom, we are experts at stopping unwanted calls for seniors. We've been doing it for over 7 years. We've handled over 9 million calls for our subscribers. And here's some real life examples of a few of our families prior to joining Telecom. So one of our subscribers shared that their parents were sold a $60,000 solar panel installation 3 separate times. Another man called claiming to be from Verizon to fix the internet. He ended up getting an incredible amount of personal information, including a photo of the senior holding a blank check from her checkbook. And in May alone, we blocked over 164,000 spam, telemarketer, and stranger calls from reaching our seniors. So, I mean, there's a lot of stories out there. And we hear them all the time, and I'm sure you guys do too. So there's a lot of reports out there showing different figures for elder fraud. The bottom line is it's a huge problem. The exact number is not as important as keeping seniors from becoming one of those statistics. So elder fraud can begin in many ways. So let's highlight a few of them and some possible solutions. Now, companies like TrueLink Financial can provide an umbrella of protection over a senior's spending while stopping possible fraud. Now, with the TrueLink Visa card, families and guardians can help vulnerable seniors manage their finances with ease and security. Seniors can enjoy the freedom of making everyday purchases, while caregivers can customize the card's settings and monitor the spending habits. Excuse me. I think Joyce and I are having the same voice problem here. When it comes to free email providers, they're all fairly good at controlling most of the spam and phishing emails. Plus, the main benefit of using a free email provider is that families can access email from any device, any location, regardless of the internet service provider or the cellular carrier. Now, it also makes it easy for family caregivers and guardians to monitor the senior's emails remotely. Now, according to DuckDuckGo, 85% of all emails actually have third-party tracking codes built into them, into the content of that email. So sometimes basic spam protection just isn't enough. AOL and Microsoft provide options for extra levels of protection, allowing the users to limit emails to only contacts. This means that only emails from approved contacts are delivered to the inbox, further protecting the senior from possible fraud. So for even more protection, both Apple Safari and DuckDuckGo browsers offer the option of using unique random email addresses that are specific to the website you're on. This allows you to further limit spam emails by deleting those temporary email addresses when you no longer want to hear from that website or anything. You don't have to worry about the unsubscribes or them sharing the emails, because they're ultimately fake email addresses that are forwarded to your regular email. So you've never divulged your real email address. Now, to help monitor incoming postal mail, it's recommended that the family sign up for informed delivery. so that they can see what mail is being delivered to their loved one. We've used that for years, just ourselves personally, and it's great because you get this email with pictures of what's in the mailbox for that day. For some reason, my clicking isn't being very effective. So for door-to-door scams, you might install a doorbell camera or other cameras on the outside of the doors to help families monitor who's coming to their loved one's door. There's a lot of options out there, but the Blink line from Amazon are inexpensive and they're subscription free. Now, many families find that adding cameras within the home provides them an extra level of comfort. Again, there's a lot of options out there, and families must consider the equipment costs and any monthly service costs. For seniors living in a senior living community, security cameras have become commonplace. This is because they're helpful in keeping an eye on loved ones, especially those with dementia or other cognitive issues. It makes them more vulnerable to theft or other crimes. There are no federal laws specifically governing the use of cameras in assisted living apartments by families. However, individual state laws vary significantly. Texas is one of the few states with laws that allow residents of senior livings to install surveillance cameras in their rooms. There are certain guidelines that you must follow under Texas law. You must give the community prior notice. By law, the community cannot refuse the request to install an electronic monitoring device. They also cannot refuse admittance or removal of the resident because of that request to use a camera. If it's a shared room, you must have the written consent from the roommate. Otherwise, you risk violating their privacy rights. The resident or their guardian must pay for all the expenses related to the electronic monitoring, including the equipment, the installation, and the maintenance. There also has to be a clearly visible note or sign at the resident's room showing that the room is being monitored by a camera. Now, you should consider getting advice from an elder law attorney if you're unsure about the laws, and especially outside of Texas as well. As I'd mentioned, they do vary dramatically. So phone scams continue to be the largest and most widespread form of elder fraud that is not friend and family related. So AARP reports that $28 billion is defrauded from seniors annually. 43% of that begins with a phone call, but ultimately 70% actually involves the telephone. Many of them that start with email or mail still end up over the phone to finalize transactions and then continue transactions in the future. And 18% of those calls actually involves family members or friends that are causing the fraud. The deal is, there are several tools available to help seniors stay safe while using the telephone. Now, we've all heard about the government's do not call registry. While this does not stop all telemarketer calls, it does help to reduce the number of legitimate telemarketing calls, and therefore we do recommend that families go online and sign up for this service. You also have to verify this, re-verify annually. It will expire each year. Now, Stir and Shaken are FCC standards that were developed a few years ago to stop spoofing numbers, and all the major carriers are using it today. What it does is it verifies that the caller ID for an incoming call looks legitimate. The technology does not block any calls from actually ringing to your phone. Instead, it attaches a message to the caller ID to let you know it might be spam. So it may say verified, or it may say possible spam, likely spam, something like that. While this does help to reduce caller ID spoofing, which is one form of scammers that scammers use, it's not 100% effective, and scammers have learned a lot of ways around them. It also does not prevent any SMS or text message scams. Now, the 4 major cell phone carriers have free services available to reduce scam calls. You'll need to download an app from them on your smartphone and set it up from there. Now, they do provide some protection, and there are paid versions that will provide additional protection. They are not 100% effective, and they only work on incoming calls. It's also worth noting that services from other carriers like Lively or Great Call, Consumer Cellular, or Mint Mobile offer no scam protection at all. Most of them do allow you to download third-party apps that can help with that. The exception to that is the Jitterbug phones from Lively and Great Call, which do not allow any third-party apps, and therefore they do not allow any scam protection whatsoever. So for iPhone users, there's a great feature called Silence Unknown Callers. You'll find it under your settings, phone settings. When you turn this on, it'll only allow incoming calls from contacts or from people that you have recently called. All others go straight to voicemail. Now, this does not keep you from getting spam or telemarketer calls, but most of them won't leave voicemails, so you won't be bothered by them. For Android users, you'll need to check your specific model. There's so many different variations of Android phones that few of them have this similar feature, but many do not. However, there are apps out there that you can download to help do this as well. So phone scams have become commonplace for all of us. But with the introduction of Stir and Shaken by the FTC, these scams are declining and text scams are replacing them. Last year, Americans reported losing $330 million to text scams, which is double the reported losses from the year prior. The two top spots are still held by fraudulent bank texts and the free gift or prize scams. But the third place now goes to the package delivery scams. And actually, while working on this slide deck over the weekend, I actually received that scam right there from a Malaysian phone number, which was a package delivery scam. Now, if you search your app store, you'll find many third-party apps out there claiming that they will block all the spam and telemarketer calls for you. Some of them are more effective than others. The top 3 for both iPhone and Android are Haya, RoboKiller, and NomoRobo. All of these are for incoming calls only. 2 of them say they do SMS scams as well. None of them are 100% effective, and they all have monthly fees attached. Now, for landline customers, there's NomoRobo. You can register for this free service on their website, and once it's installed, incoming calls will ring one time while NomoRobo verifies the caller ID and in its databases. If it appears to be spam, NomoRobo will disconnect the call for you. Now, like all the others, this is for incoming calls only, and it is not 100% effective. So for caregivers that need additional protection for their loved one, they might consider a telecom caregiver or the telecom mobile service. Now, this landline and cell phone service empowers families to stop unwanted incoming and outgoing calls, including late night calls, repeated calls, 911 abuse, and deliberate and targeted fraud. At the heart of that service is the caregiver app. For caregivers, family caregivers would subscribe to the service and manage the service for their loved one remotely using that caregiver app. With telecom, calls to trusted contacts pass straight through, while suspicious calls and known bad guys are blocked immediately. Using the app, family caregivers can prevent all bad calls, even problem calls the senior makes due to their dementia. So that service is provided to seniors at both in homes and in senior living communities, even memory care where they may not otherwise be allowed to have a telephone. Thanks a lot for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you have during the Q&A. Thanks, Kathleen.
I still have a tickle in my throat.
Hey, Kathleen, we can't hear you, by the way.
Can you hear me now? Oop.
Yep.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sorry about that. So first thing is about the evaluation. I will put the evaluation link in the chat. Make sure that everyone does the evaluation. You can also use it via the QR code that's up on your screen if you wanted to use your phone to do it. And then I had put a few questions in the chat myself. Joyce, were you able to review those? Because the first one or two questions in there were specifically for you. So would love for you to address those. And then I will look and see if there are any additional questions. And we are taking questions from everyone in the audience. We encourage you to participate in the Q&A discussion and ask them questions. So Joyce, do you want to answer the few that are in there while we wait to see if there's additionals?
The password managing apps. I think Tavis might be, how safe are the password managing apps? Tavis, are you able to answer that better than me?
Tavis, we can't hear you.
It didn't matter because basically I just said, I don't even see the questions. Oh, there it is. Okay. It was right in front of me. How safe are the password managing apps? Oh, okay. So for instance, I use 1Password, have for a long time. There are several of those out there, cross-platform, use them on websites as well as your phone. I recommend only using one that works across all the platforms you use, but they are pretty awesome. We've been using them for years, and I've never, it all depends on just how safe you are with your phone. If you ever lose your phone and make it easy to get to that password saving app, then things can go awry. Otherwise, they are fairly good.
Okay, thank you. Joyce, do you want to talk a little bit about the difference between force feeding versus hand feeding and encouragement feeding? I know that once people have really declined with their dementia, there is a lot of hand feeding that happens and encouraging them to feed and, and encouraging them to drink or to consume almost like candies that are filled with fluid to help keep them hydrated. And so when you talked about the abuse of force feeding, how do we determine when hand feeding and encouragement feeding crosses over to force feeding?
Yeah. So when people, as they decline, like you said, with dementia and all that, sometimes they forget to eat and not able to eat. And you talked about the different hand feeding as an option, but the liquids and the little, what do they call those, jelly?
Yeah, they're fluid filled.
Water jellies or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's different. Force feeding, I'm thinking, is more where you're forcing someone to eat that may not be cognitive. that is cognitive and you're forcing them to eat. Is that what you're implying with that question?
What
That's-
I'm implying is when should we feel like, I'm really inquiring, it's really an ethical question about the rights of the person with dementia to refuse to eat. And when we're encouraging them, when do we cross the line into force feeding them?
Well, yeah, I
That's
really
really what
can't
I'm
answer
asking.
that maybe a nurse can answer that. Well, you are a nurse.
I am a nurse.
Okay, yeah. Because I think, force feeding someone that is not wanting to eat, they could accidentally choke on the food and everything. So I'm not able to answer that question probably to the level that you may be asking.
Well, I think I'm really encouraging conversation around it because I'm
Oh,
not sure
okay.
that there is a full answer. Is there anyone who's participating on the call who has anything that they want to contribute to that question? You can raise your hand or unmute. All right, well, then we'll go on to the next question.
I can make a comment with my dad. I mean, I think part of it is a gut feel as well, as a family member, if it's a family member versus a professional doing it. If you hopefully you feel that you're going too far based on the interaction. I know with my dad, he just lost the desire to eat, but he would still eat until a point where it was causing him problems, and then he just stopped. And at that point, that's when you realize, okay, if I force it on him, okay, now it's crossed a line. And it's a hard decision to make as a family member, but at some point you are faced with it a lot of times.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions? I put the evaluation code in the chat again. Tavis, I did have one additional comment. So it's getting more and more difficult to recognize the real text messages and emails from scams. And so do you have any tips on how what we should be watching for to try and decide if it's a scam text or email versus something really coming from the company?
Right. So I guess my rule of thumb is if I wasn't expecting it, then I ignore it. If I don't know who it's from, then I ignore it. In a few years, things will change. That stir shaken type technology, they are working on that for text messaging as well. But there's no good solutions out there, either by the carriers or otherwise. But if you're not sure, don't click on it. 100% don't click on it. If it looks like it might be from your bank, sign on to your bank account yourself. Don't click on it, because if they sent you some message, chances are when you sign on, you're going to have a message waiting for you in there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Good advice. Here is that slide with the phone numbers and the departments and the different circumstances for everyone. And when I send the certificates, I will try to send this over to everyone as well, because I think it's pretty handy to have. But essentially, if your victim is in a nursing home, assisted living, or they receive care from home health, home care or hospice, you report it to the Texas Department of State Health Services, the department that actually licenses those providers. If they are a resident at a long-term care facility or they receive Medicaid funding, you report it to the Attorney General's Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. And if the abuse is happening at home and they don't receive any other government services like that, then you would be reporting that to Adult Protective Services. And I also want to let you all know that the Texas Department of State Health Services, they do not answer that phone 24/7. I believe they're open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so your call may be returned the next day. And so, well, that's not necessarily ideal when these forms of abuse and neglect are happening. If you feel like the person is in immediate danger in any of these circumstances, 911 or the sheriff's office or the police department is where you would call if you thought that they were in imminent danger. And that, if there's no questions, no additional questions, that concludes our program for today. And so we really do appreciate that. Actually,
Kathleen,
we do have a couple more comments in the chat. Someone says, I get a lot of questionable emails with suggestive info. I try to unsubscribe, but then it asks for my email address. What is the best way to handle this?
sure, I can take that. So Joni, basically, unless you know, if it's something that you subscribe to that you're getting like emails on a weekly basis and there's an unsubscribe and you don't want to get them anymore, you can click on that unsubscribe. But those other emails you're talking about, you should never use the unsubscribe, because that can just be another way that they can get confirmation that you're real, that you're a real person, that they've reached somebody. Instead, most of the email systems have a block to add to a block list or spam, or identify it as spam, which should eliminate that email address from getting into your inbox in the future. And that really is the best way to do it for those types of emails.
Great. Thank you for that information, Tavis. So anyone who needs to leave the call, you are welcome to go. Just remember to fill out your evaluation. Your certificates will be sent in the mail. I think that those of us who are still here can stay on for just a few more moments. And if anyone does have anything or any last minute questions for our speakers, please go ahead and either put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself to have a little more conversation if you want to. So thank you all for being here. And thank you to Tavis with Telecom and Joyce with RubyCare Senior Living Advisors. We really appreciate you both being here today.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, cool day.
Yes. Thank you, everyone.